Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1397A, and today's date is October 10th, 2017, and the title of the episode is De-Dollarization Continues, More Countries Pivot Away from the Dollar. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, at this point, we realize that the central banks, they want complete control of the cryptocurrency market. And we also know that the cryptocurrency market, it is a decentralized system. But we do know that UBS, the central banks, and many other banks are all together creating their own type of system where they're going to tell the public, listen, instead of having all this volatility, we will make sure that everything stays stable. Now, of course, the volatility means that it's a free, open market, and this is what it really looks like compared to the stock market, which is completely manipulated. But we can see there's a lot of countries out there that do not want an open and free market. And we can see that there are certain governments here in the United States where they're trying to put restrictions. We know China has been putting restrictions. Russia wants to put restrictions. And they're doing this to control the entire system. Now remember, the central banking system does not have any allegiance to any country, to any group. Their allegiance is to currency. They're creating currency out of thin air. Their allegiance is to debt. And it doesn't matter where they're located. It makes no difference whatsoever. And we can see that certain governments, they're very afraid of cryptocurrencies. Russia is very nervous about it. China is very nervous about it. The United States is very nervous about it because they want to control the system. Now, of course, you have the central banks that sit on top of all this, where they're the ones who are creating the currencies for most of these countries, just like the EU. We have them creating the currency for most of the countries within the EU. And we see right now there are many countries that are going to try to stop this. Russia, for instance, their central bank, they said that, listen, they're going to support efforts to block access to external websites selling cryptocurrencies in the country. And remember, the crypto market is completely decentralized. And it's very, very difficult to control, except when the central banks create their own crypto currency and they tell everyone this is the currency that you should be using. But the really free and open cryptocurrency, it is kept on many, many servers. It's very, very difficult to control. And we can see that they're doing whatever they possibly can to control the system. Now, out in London, we see that the housing prices, they are falling. And they have fallen in September. This is the first time in 8 years. The high-end London property fell by 3.2% this year. House sales are now down by over a very large 1/3. And we can see right now the bubbles are starting to pop in certain areas. And again, most of the people in these countries, they are not the ones who are actually purchasing the homes. It's investment companies, hedge funds, foreign investors, you name it, they've been doing it. And we're not just seeing it out in London, we're seeing it in Canada, we're seeing it in Australia, we're seeing it throughout Europe, we're seeing it even here in the United States. Now, we've been looking at the real estate market quite closely. And out in New York, we see something very, very interesting. That commercial real estate market in New York City is collapsing at the same time that residential foreclosures are surging to levels not seen since 2009. Now think about this. Foreclosures of residential homes are skyrocketing. They're surging right now. Now, Property Shark points out today foreclosures across New York City surged by 79% year on year in the third quarter of 2017 to 859 and remain at the highest level since the Great Recession. All 5 boroughs registered increases in the number of homes scheduled for auction. So what we're looking at right now is the beginning of a housing collapse. Now, we've been noticing this out in California. We've been seeing this out in Toronto. We've been seeing this in Vancouver. We've been seeing this around the country. And remember, Kay Schiller only looks at those 20 cities, and they pumped up these cities to make it look like the real estate market was doing a lot better than it really was. But everything outside of these cities, guess what? Prices are falling. Traffic is drying up. And this is at a point where interest rates are at the lowest we've ever seen. And they have programs right now where it allows people to come in with hardly any credit, 0% down. And once again, we are stuck in the same exact position as we were back in 2008, 2009. Nothing has changed. All they did was create this gigantic illusion. Now, the IMF is out there, and they're talking about how the global economy is doing and how the global growth outlook looks. And they're saying that, yeah, things are starting to pick up. Things are starting to look a lot better. And they're saying the global GDP is going to expand by 3.6% in 2017 and 3.7% in 2018. Now, we know when the IMF gives us their numbers, it's always overinflated. They're saying that the U.S. is going to be growing at 2.2% this year and 2.1% this year going into next year. Now, remember, these numbers are completely manipulated. They are manipulated, and they've gone back, especially in the United States, all the way back to 1929. They included research and development, recalculated the GDP all the way up to the current time. They manipulated the numbers as much as they possibly can, and they've done this throughout the world, not just here in the United States, and they're trying to figure out a way of convincing the public that everything is fine. But buried in the report, there was this warning from the IMF chief economist, Maurice Obstfeld. A closer look suggests that the global recovery may not be sustainable. Not all countries are participating. Inflation often remains below target with weak wage growth, and the medium-term outlook will still disappoint in many parts of the world. What they're really saying is that the economy is not fixed, because they don't mention this part. They only mention the part like, here are our numbers, here are our statistics. Doesn't everything look great? But when you delve into all these reports, you see what they're really talking about. They're saying that this cannot be sustained the way it is. Why? Because countries have too much debt. Wage growth is declining. People can't find jobs. And most of these countries that have a huge amount of debt, they have austerity. It cannot work out this way. And the IMF is out there. We're very optimistic on the rest of the world, except for Britain. Of course, Britain wants to leave the central banking system of the EU. So now they're saying that Britain is not going to do well during this period. Now, of course, this is fake, phony, and false, like everything else. But what we're seeing right now is they're giving us this fake message that everything is fine. Just like the Fed came out, Janet Yellen came out, said, we're not going to see an economic crisis, in our lifetime. If we go back in time, Bernanke said they're not forecasting any type of recession anytime soon, and we had the recession during the time he told us this. So all of this is being built up to make us believe and think that the economy is going to continually do well. But we've been looking at every single aspect of the economy, and what we've been seeing, and we've been looking at a lot of indicators. We've been looking at real information. People have been writing in like crazy, letting me know that things are not going well in their area. They were going well at one time, but things are starting to fall off. Malls are completely empty. The housing market is not doing well in many of the areas, and people are starting to know this. Now, these same people were writing in at one time saying that, the housing market was fantastic in their area, and now all of a sudden things have already switched. So everything is about to change, or is changing right now. And as you can see, the central bankers are out there trying to convince us that everything is going to be fine. And once they start doing this, we know right off the bat that things are going to start to deteriorate very, very quickly. Now, we see a lot of countries out there, and they are moving away from the dollar. We're seeing country after country after country, especially those countries with sanctions. They're just saying, something, we're not dealing with the dollar anymore. And we can see that Turkey right now, they are doing a Eurasian pivot, and they are going to be doing away with the dollar, basically bypassing the dollar, because Turkey and Iran have officially announced that the future bilateral trade will be conducted in Iranian rial or Turkish lira. So again, we have Russia, we have China, we have Turkey, we have Iran, we have Syria, we have Iraq. We have many of these countries, Venezuela, and many others who are turning away from the dollar. I mean, Saudi Arabia already made a deal with Russia right now. everyone is starting to pivot. This is a slow pivot. It doesn't happen overnight because they don't want the world to catch on. And when I say the world, I'm talking about the everyday person. Because if the everyday person started to realize that countries are turning away from the dollar, people would get nervous, there'd be panic, and they're trying to keep this very, very quiet until the very, very end. They do this with pretty much everything: the stock market, the housing market, the automobile market. They do this every single area. They keep it very, very quiet until the very end, until everything is said and done, and then all of a sudden they just let loose and they don't really care what happens because they're already set up. And we can see that these countries, they're going to continually do this. Why? Because the United States, the cabal, they are losing their power. They can't use the dollar to force countries into doing things they don't want to do. And we can see that sanctions are really having no effect whatsoever on many of the countries because they're just not using the dollar at this point. So as we move forward, things are going to start to break down even further. And as these countries stop using the dollar, there's no real reason to keep the dollar in reserve. So we're going to see a lot of countries start to sell their treasury bonds. We're going to see a lot of countries start to sell or get rid of their dollar, trade it in, maybe use them to buy gold or something else. And we're going to see this happen, and it's going to accelerate as we move forward. Just like we've been seeing the de-dollarization accelerate as we move forward into this year. I think it's just going to get worse and worse and worse because countries are going to start to wake up and they're going to start to realize that, yeah, the dollar is pretty much doomed at this point, and we better protect ourselves. Now, they still might be dealing in the dollar while they use their own currency. But what happens is they slowly move over to their own currency. They move away from the dollar, and this process will continue. Before you know it, a lot of countries are not using the dollar, and people are just going to wake up and say, wow, when did this happen? This just happened right now? No, it happens very, very slowly. Just like we see the deterioration of the retail market here in the United States, where retail is imploding on itself, just like we see the slow deterioration of the housing market, it's imploding on itself. It's a very, very slow process. Just like the central bank took a very slow process of pumping it all up, well, the deflation of all these bubbles, the popping of all these bubbles, slowly deflates, and all of a sudden it accelerates, and boom, everyone starts to realize what is really happening here. This is why we've been telling everyone to get ready and prepared for what is coming. This is why you need food, because you don't want to be running around when inflation hits, and inflation will hit. It always does. It's just a matter of time. And remember, they've been manipulating the inflation numbers. A lot of the Fed houses have come up with their inflation numbers, and they're at 3%, 3.1%, and they've been offloading the inflation into the stock market, into the housing market, into the college market, into the health market, across the ocean, into other countries, and eventually this is all going to come flooding back. So you want to have food, you want to have supplies, because you don't want to be running around when prices start to move up. You want to make sure you have fuel, you want to make sure you have gold and silver, cash on hand, because you will use the cash on hand first as the currency breaks down. And when the currency becomes worthless, you'll probably move to bartering. And then once bartering is over, you move into gold and silver at this time as they create this new currency. Now, the new currency might be a cryptocurrency. A lot of people saying at the high level, it might be the SDR. At the low level, it might be a cryptocurrency that every single country uses. And of course, the cryptocurrency that they want to use is controlled by the central bank. That's what they've been planning on for a very long time. But the people have to decide what they want to use. We shouldn't leave it up to the central bank to decide what we should be using. The people should decide what we should be using, and we should have a vote in to say, you know something, we don't want the central bank to control our currency. We've seen what they've done in them before. They have too much power. They're not part of the government. It's a private corporation, and there's no reason for them to do this. Now, if they take control of the crypto market, they will have control over most everything, because think about it. Control over the entire electronic currency would be a disaster for mankind. It'd be better off if it was completely decentralized and there was no one controlling it, because if they have control, it's not an open and free market. It means they can manipulate it the way they want. So we need to decide when the time comes of what we want. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.